Welcome to Hall County Connection. I'm Billy Skaggs, your host today for Nikki Young, who's on special assignment. Today we're at Alachi Nature Science Center, and we really appreciate the folks at Alachi allowing us to be here today. They do a tremendous job of providing educational programs regarding the environment and natural resources in our community, and we're really glad to be here. Today's show is going to be great. We're glad you're with us. We're going to be doing several things. Number one, we're going to be talking with Jane Owens of Home Development Resources, talking about the programs that they offer and how it benefits the citizens of Hall County. Also, a little bit later, I'm going to be visiting with you about vegetable gardening, a growing trend. We're getting lots of questions and lots of inquiries from the public on how to go about starting their vegetable garden. So we're going to be talking about that. But first, we're going to visit with Cynthia Taylor, Natural Resources Manager here at Alachi Nature Science Center, and we're going to be talking specifically about exotic invasive plants and the threat they pose to our environment and our community. Cynthia, how are you today?
Nice to be here.
Thank you. Appreciate you being here today. As we get started, tell us a little bit about Alachi Nature Science Center and some of the programs and things that you offer.
Well, Alachi is very proud to be celebrating its 30th birthday this year. So we've been a part of the community for 30 years, teaching students environmental education and protecting the natural resources of the Chicopee Woods. And we're real happy to be able to continue that into the future. We're working on some big celebrations for our 30th birthday, a special Earth Day event,
Great.
And gearing up for school programs this spring and wonderful summer camp programs all summer long.
Well, I know I see a lot of kids coming and going here and
Right.
just tremendous activities going on. Snake Day is always a big popular one, and lots of other activities for the community. And so we're really glad to be here at Alachi, and I know that y'all are doing great things. But in particular, you work in the area of invasive and exotic plants and the problems that they pose. When we say invasive exotic, what do those terms mean to the average gardener? What are we talking about?
Well, your average gardener generally thinks about weeds, and that's a plant that's growing that they don't want to be dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
But when we're talking about exotic invasive plants, we're talking about plants that are growing in an environment where they're not native. And they could be native to other parts of the state of Georgia, and if they're growing here in the Piedmont, they might be considered an exotic invasive.
Okay.
So it's plants that are growing that are not native to a given area, but it's not just that, it's the fact that they're causing some kind of environmental or economic harm to that area. So if they are to the point where they're decreasing native biodiversity or impacting wildlife habitats, then they're considered a problem or an exotic invasive that we will try and control.
Okay. Now, not all exotic plants are invasive.
That's right. Because
a lot of our general ornamental plants in the landscape are exotic plants or introduced plants, but they're not necessarily a problem for us.
That's right. It's estimated that about 1 out of 100 exotic plants that we introduce for landscape plants has a tendency to become invasive.
Okay.
So it's a very small percentage. Unfortunately, some of the easiest plants to grow do have invasive tendencies, and we have to be a little bit careful about that. But in general, most of the landscape plants that we choose are not going to be invasive. So you don't have to stick with strictly native plants, although,
Sure.
you know, for drought tolerance, those are some of your best choices as well.
Absolutely. When we talk about exotic plants and some of those that are brought into the landscape environment, a lot of those are selected because they're vigorous and easy to grow, which is exactly what you don't want in terms of it being invasive or not. So.
Right.
What's Alachi doing? What are you guys doing to try to control these things and get the word out to people?
Well, we've been working on a program for 3 years now, trying to control invasives here in the park. We started out by going out and seeing, well, just how big the problem is. We did some mapping, and we identified, just looking at 3 species, kudzu, privet, and honeysuckle. We identified over 30 acres that were what we considered infested. They were growing to the point where they were a monoculture of these plants.
Wow.
And had totally eliminated the native plants that would be growing in that area, and were having an impact on our rare and threatened plants and an impact on the wildlife habitat as well. So we mapped those 30-plus acres and began looking at ways that we could get that under control and sort of restore those areas. And we came up with a 5-year plan. These are not plants that are easy to control. Once they're out there and that abundant in the landscape, it takes pretty heroic efforts to get in there and actually remove them. And so we developed a 5-year plan using preventative methods, education for the public, doing workshops to try and let people know what these plants are and what they can do to help, and actually getting out on the ground with volunteers and removing plants, hiring contractors as well to work with herbicides to remove some of the worst of these plants.
So the famed privet pull, that sort of thing. You're
Absolutely.
getting volunteers out to actually get in there and do the physical work.
Right. We've had hundreds of volunteers in the past year come out just to work on removing some of these invasives from the park. So
yeah, and unfortunately, a lot of those plants, like we say, like your privet and your ligustrum species, they're attractive plants to a lot of people, and they're great landscape. They would be great landscape plants,
That's right.
I guess I should say, if they weren't so invasive and aggressive.